Welcome to day 2 of the volume profile series. Now, the aim of this series is to help you to identify good quality volume profile setups and to get a good idea of what to look for when trading the volume profile. Now, we're trading the S&P 500 here, and I'm going to break down a good A+ setup from every trading day. I'm here in my hotel room here in Tokyo right now, trading on the road, so excuse the backdrop, but let's get into it. Now, I'm going to draw your attention to this area here. This is our setup for the day, our A+ setup. I know a lot of you trade the New York session primarily, so tomorrow we'll get more into New York session setups, but today this trade setup was just too good to pass up. So this one is from the overnight session. So number one, what we do is we always have the previous day's value levels on the charts, the most recent regular trading hours volume profile drawn from 9:30 to 4 p.m. So going into that Sunday overnight, going into Monday, if you recall from our day 1 episode, we were looking to see what happens around this previous days and previous week's point of control area. So you can see that on the open here, it quickly traded below point of control. What we wanted to see was to see how price reacted when it came back to retest that point of control. So that's an overlapping point of control of the previous day and the previous week, totally overlapping there. So it's an important level we want to watch. That is fair value for the last week and the most recent day. So opened up, dropped below fair value, but buyers quickly stepped in and brought that back above. So what we're seeing at that point is, number one, we're seeing, okay, that's our first clue that we may want to look for longs. The markets are currently displaying bullish signs, pushing back above fair value. So that's our first sign to look for a long trade here. Second, we want to see how price behaves as we approach the previous day's value area high. Now, the value area high is what's considered premium pricing. So as price came up and traded above the value area high, it reached that point. We had a little bit of resistance, but buyers immediately pushed us above the value area high. There was little to no sellers present at this point, and price was able to trade up and above value highs with almost no problem, little to no resistance. So trading above the VAH, again, is another sign to look for longs. So that is another check on our checklist. Now, of course, we can't just trade based on that alone. We now need extra confluence added to the trade. So what we do is we draw the current session's developing profile. So if we've got the previous day's profile already on the charts, we're drawing that overnight profile now. Since this trade idea happens around 7:30 p.m., you want to draw that overnight profile, the developing profile, started at 6 p.m. You have that profile on the chart constantly developing by having it click extend right so that it can move with you as price develops, and you can watch these levels. And what we're waiting for here is, as price trades up into that previous day's value area high level, you're waiting for an added confluence to happen here. And what we want to see is we want to see a current developing profile, value level or high volume node develop right in junction with one of the previous day value levels. So what we can see is, as price traded above the previous day's value area high, notice how the value area high of the current session's developing profile is shifting up. It's shifting up towards the same price point as the previous day's value high. And what we can see here is that we're also getting, if you look at the profile, you're getting volume developing up at this point as well, up at the highs. So that's telling us that yes, there are market participants willing to trade at relatively expensive levels up here relative to Friday's value. And another clue you can look at on the volume profile here is, notice how fair value for the session, for the overnight session, is down here at 6332. Although that's considered a fair price, look how much price has moved up away from fair value and is holding above fair value and developing extra volume away from the current session's fair value point. So what that tells us is that the bulls are starting to gain control. And we can see that here. Number one, the value area high is shifted up towards the highs. And then watch what happens basically right as that entry point happens, is fair value shifts from down here to up here. So now fair value is at 6337, almost perfectly in line with the previous day's value area highs. So to put that in more simple terms, what was considered Friday's fair value point and the previous week's fair value point down here in this range has now shifted up. Fair value is now considered, at least for this session, to be around the value highs of the previous session. So as soon as you see that happen, and you see price pull back into the zone where you have multiple confluences, you have the previous day's value area high, you have price holding above fair value for the last week and the last session, and you have fair value and a high volume node developing across here, reinforcing that previous day's value level, you now have 3 or more confluences to be able to more confidently take this trade. That is where you'd enter your long position. I would like to have my stop loss down at fair value because I wouldn't want to see price trade back into this area. That would invalidate the trade idea. And my take profit target, you could do one of two things. You could either go for a small trade and target the value area high of the current profile, or because there's a nearby target, you could quite easily go for the previous week's value area high level, which would also be a logical target for this trade. Now, one reason that you would potentially hold this for longer in this case than the current session's value high is because we saw that fair value price shift from what was initially down here below fair value, right? Current session's fair value being below previous session's fair value. Because we saw that shift quite dramatically to the upper portion of this range, we may more confidently hold a long trade up towards a bigger target. So that is another perfect A+ setup using the volume profile during the overnight session. Now, I ran a poll on the channel just yesterday asking what the main session you guys trade is, and a lot of you trade the New York session. So what we'll do tomorrow is we'll identify trade setups in the New York session that you could also trade. Now, the New York session today, you can see we traded well away from the previous day's levels. We basically found support near the previous week's value high, shot all the way up before in the afternoon coming all the way back down to previous week's value high. So there wasn't too many setups in terms of using the previous day's value levels, but what I can show you tomorrow is if we have a similar situation for tomorrow's New York session, I will show you how to utilize the current session's developing profile to find setups. Right, these trades typically will have less confluence, but there are some really interesting plays you can take using the current session developing profile when we're trading away from these value levels. So what we're going to do now is, now that that session's closed and we have a new regular trading hours session put in, you always use the most recent regular trading hours session from 9:30 New York time through to 4 p.m. and then place the next day's value levels on the chart. So what we're seeing here at the moment is that we're currently trading away. We've melted away from the previous day's value levels. We've kind of almost tested the value area low here and sellers took control back down to the previous week's value high, back into the previous week's value area. So now after extending and expanding above the previous week's value areas this morning, we've now pulled back into the previous week's value area. So showing that there are sellers present at these levels. So we want to see, again, the fair value point of last week being a key area to see what happens here. We've seen so far buyers are stepping in and are buying and holding us above the previous week's fair value for now. So we want to see how that behaves. If we're going to look for longs, you're going to want to see us hold above the previous week's value highs and trade back up through these previous day value levels. So we'll break down in tomorrow's video in day 3 some New York session setups using the volume profiles. Hopefully we get some triple whammies by getting the confluences with the previous day levels, the current session levels, and maybe some high volume nodes for tomorrow's session, so I can show you New York traders what I would look for during those hours. So like if you find this helpful, I know a lot of you guys are a fan of this type of video. I'm glad that you're finding them helpful. We're going to be doing these every day with the purpose of you learning how to identify good volume profile trade setups. If you want to trade using Apex or Take Profit Trader, code CAMCAP, CAMCAP, will get you the best discount. Those are linked below. And if you want to have a look into my volume profile trading course to go deeper into what I'm doing here, that link is also in the description. Back to tourism activities for me, so I'll see you guys again tomorrow night.